Good morning, everyone. My name is Giorgio Roscigno. I am the current executive chair of Next to People South Africa. I've been in the past the CEO of FIND and also the CEO of the Global Alliance and the Chief Operating Officer of the African Laboratory Medicine and the initiative. And I'm very excited about the session of today for many reasons. First of all, we have very high caliber speakers. They will introduce themselves, but allow me to say hello to my old friend, Chris Whitfield, that you all know, and Navin will tell us more his introduction. I think that this session on intellectual property comes really at a very high demand time when we have all witnessed what is going on with the COVID-19 and the vaccine production and all the saga that came out of it with very important communication about property rights, intellectual property right of vaccines, and the capacity for African countries to manufacture to meet the very acute and urgent demand. And I think this has resurrected a little bit the whole issue about intellectual property for pharmaceuticals beyond the vaccine, which we'll hopefully say a few things about. But I think that just for us all to recall the year 2000, when in South Africa we had the big crisis of AIDS and the big fight and the TRIPS agreement and the Doha Declaration and all what that came out with it. And just to recall some of the issues related to the Doha Declaration and the TRIPS flexibilities that are there for pharmaceutical industry to develop on the continent. Certainly, this has to be acknowledged and has to be disseminated as a basic knowledge. And the critical issue are the exemption on patent rights, the scientific research exemption, the BOLAR patent, and compulsory and voluntary licensing. This is really a very important issue, and we have all been debating about how intellectual property can accelerate the pharmaceutical industry development in Africa, or are there other things that should we be considering within that context, and particularly the lack of very high, except with very few exceptions, of very big, strong, quality assured pharmaceutical companies, GMP, that could be able to pick up the exemption to patent right and start manufacturing. Even the African CDC is expecting that might take up to 10 years or 5 to 10 years to be able for pharmaceutical company in Africa to be able to start producing vaccines. The same is not true to pharmaceuticals. We are very privileged today to have a very important example of companies that have been going through the whole issue around the voluntary licensing, and certainly we will benefit from his experience and the example that we produce. So let me ask Dr. Christopher Whitfield to share with us his perspective on intellectual property and pharmaceutical manufacturing in Africa. Please, Chris.
Great, thanks a lot, Giorgio. I really appreciate it. Good to see you again. First, let me just introduce Gilead. Many of you have known me from a variety of different companies in the past, but with Gilead, you guys may know we've been around for nearly about 35 years. We pioneered more than 25 different medicines, and we have an expanding portfolio, which is quite exciting as we move forward, mostly in the viral segment. I'm a member and I'm the regional manager for Gilead's Global Patient Solutions. Now, their Global Patient Solutions is a subset of the overall commercial enterprise within Gilead, and we focus on about 127 countries. My responsibility is for all of Africa, so it's exciting to be here. So you guys know he's an African-American African, so he's here, and we operate out of Johannesburg. And really our whole focus is to address and reverse health inequities and help countries to really overcome the barriers to treatment in low and middle income countries. And that's about 2 billion people, if you really think about it, and most of the diseases are challenging. So if you take a look at our focus on viral diseases in Africa, it's about 90% of the patients on the globe living with HIV. In comparison's sake, there's about 7.7 million people in South Africa that have HIV. In the United States, comparison is 1 million. So you can see the relative nature of that. Also, if you think about what's going on with hepatitis C, we've got about half of the patients in the world are people living with hepatitis C, and about 60% of the patients with chronic hepatitis B. So we've got a little bit of experience on how to address and challenging this. One thing that Gilead realized fairly early was that being able to create an environment where the product will be available, affordable, and accessible really challenged our original thoughts around intellectual property. I think that if you take a look at what you mentioned, African CDC, John Nkosong, he talked about some of the things that are going to be important for Africa moving forward, and clearly he had four key pieces. He talked about strengthening healthcare systems that we all kind of participate in, and integrating those 55 member states. He talked about building a competency around the public health workforce, and those guys have been really decimated based on COVID-19. And then he also identified the need for local manufacturing of diagnostics, pharmaceuticals, and vaccines. And then he also talked about, and these last two are critical, the private sector. How do we engage the private sector through innovations and new technologies to really drive health and economic security agendas? And that's key. So if you take a look at what Gilead's been able to do, we prefer, as opposed to dealing with fighting over intellectual property rights, we like to have a bit of a different approach. We have voluntary licenses. So we select companies around the world that have this capability, the quality capability, are willing to integrate into our supply chain. And we've had just an incredible experience going back 12 years now with Aspen Pharmacare, where we offered Aspen Pharmacare a voluntary license for two of our products, one for HIV, Truvada, and the other one for Variant for hepatitis B. And that was our opportunity to try and make sure that we could address, at least on the local level, the availability of these products. We've signed these deals with a number of other companies, and most recently for COVID-19, you guys will recall a product called Remdesivir. Well, we also signed a voluntary license for Remdesivir, and we partnered with 9 companies around the world, one in Africa, in Egypt, one in Pakistan, and then 7 in India. And those companies have a voluntary license where they either receive our core products and they fill finish in their different locations, and then they have the ability to distribute those products in about 109 countries going around. That helped us address the capacity issue and also the cost to manufacture these products in a very, very short period of time over the time we've been dealing with COVID-19. So we see that as a competitive advantage potentially, and other companies have also taken advantage of the patent pool and also voluntary licenses as a response to making the products more broadly available, and also to incorporate that. Now, and I'll stop here in a second, we can get into some more things, but I am desperately trying to find other partners on the African soil so that we can build the capability here in Africa. I know that I think as much as 85 or as much as 90% of pharmaceutical products are imported across Africa, and that creates a huge trade imbalance for most countries. Certainly in South Africa, this is the case. And I would love to see the ability to have local manufacturing produce a lot of the more critical products that we need, either for communicable and non-communicable diseases, and make that more sustainable so that when a situation like COVID COVID-19 comes along, we can be more self-sufficient and we can develop our businesses. And I can tell you right now, businesses are being developed wholeheartedly in India to supply into Africa, and those companies are becoming more sustainable. I would love for the opportunity to partner with more African countries to make that work, and African companies. Thanks a lot, Giorgio, and I'll sit back and we can have more conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. I think it's quite exciting perspective from a very brilliant private sector actor, which is yourself, and a very well-established company in the viral and non-viral areas. I think it's a very important perspective you are offering here, because beyond the discussion around intellectual property, what we are looking really after are practical solutions. And what you have just said now, voluntary licensing is certainly one idea that promotes technology transfer, that promotes capacity building, and certainly goes in line with what the whole issue about local manufacturing in Africa is. I will have a few more questions for you after we will hear from Dr. Naveen Khanna. Please, Dr. Naveen, the floor is yours. Maybe just say a few things about your organization and yourself. Thank you.
So, good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. I am truly delighted to be part of this meeting. My experience with biopharmaceutical has been from an academic institute. I'm from the International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology. This is an international organization based similar to United Nations organization, and we have about 70 member countries, and most of them are second and third world countries. So one of the mandate of our institute has been to biotechnology for the developing nations. So the affordability and accessibility of whether it's a drug or a diagnostics or a vaccine is very, very vital for us. And being in India, we all know that India is the pharmacy of the world. We produce so many biogenerics, and only thing which the issue in India is that many of these things, are like copied, off patents, all the recombinant proteins of medical use, or even the small molecules which are off patent. So that's why they are extremely affordable. And in fact, the company with whom I work, the Sun Pharmaceutical, is one of the biggest biogeneric company of this country. And 85% of the products are sold in US. So, they get a lot of revenues from that. And now with that revenue, with the seed revenue, they are now investing into exclusive products, which they can have a global patents. For example, they work with ICGB to secure a global patent on a dengue vaccine. But where I see a lot of opportunity for Africa is the botanical drugs. Now, botanical drugs, Asia have a gold mine of knowledge of seeing how plant-derived molecules can create, affordability, accessibility, and safety. Only thing what is needed is experimental evidence to show that they work. Either in the form of a biochemistry or molecular biology or just clinical trials. And US FDA has created a new category on botanicals. And there, the clinical trials are much easier because they say that if a particular plant is used in your country for years, if you can prove that, you can skip even phase 1, phase 2, you can directly go to phase 3. So you can really cut the cost. The competition wouldn't be that much because many of the Western nations which can spend trillions and billions into their pharma new molecules, which are beyond our imagination. So based on this experience, we have a dengue drug, which is a plant-based and which is going through now phase 2 clinical trials. So I think this is where I see an opportunity for countries like Africa to use their traditional knowledge and to strengthen it in such a way that they could aim to get a US FDA approval through clinical trials for for any of these botanical drugs. And I can answer many of these questions later. So this is the small brief about me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Naveen. I think it's already quite very interesting things, and I would like just to ask a few questions from both of you while we see a question from the floor coming in. The interesting thing about for Christopher is really we all agree voluntary licensing is the way forward, and really the potential positive implications are so big that we don't even need to underscore them. But one very important thing that I'm thinking about is that what would be your requirement, Gilead requirement, to do voluntary licensing from a local manufacturer? What would that local manufacturer have to prove to you in order to be a recipient of a voluntary license to manufacture your product? So that's the first question. The second question would be, would that voluntary licensing, is it just the last part of the manufacturing of the product, or would that also currently or in the near future include also back integrating into a little bit more value added in the country into the manufacturing? So that's my question to you. And for our friend Naveen, I think you have mentioned two things that are of interest, I hope, for the audience. One is the biogenerics, and biogenerics has been one of the areas of greatest interest in pharma industry all over the world, and certainly India has been on the forefront of this. When we look at biogenerics in Africa, I think that what we would like to hear from you is what are the regulatory implications for those biogenerics, because not the same regulatory pathway as for a generic small molecule drug is a bit quite different. That's the first thing. And the second thing on botanicals, we all agree that the competitive advantage for Africa is a huge richness in natural products, and capacity and developing capacity on that respect is also very important. Yet we have seen many experiences and many examples of IP issue relative to products that somehow have been grown, botanicals grown in Africa, then developed somewhere else in the world and covered by IP issues somewhere else and then exported to Africa. So if you can elaborate on the issue about IP issue relative to botanicals would be useful. So Chris, the floor is yours.
Right. Thanks, Giorgio. In terms of, so your first question is quite a critical one. What does it require to become a voluntary license holder? So, first, the first area of focus for us is the ability for the company to be able to operate at scale. Now, that scale might be a domestic scale in terms of countrywide or regionally. But I think it's critically important that it either has the existing infrastructure to operate at scale, or it has the possibility of expanding. That's critical because in order to make manufacturing work, and everybody will appreciate this, you need scale. One of the challenges we have in Africa now is that with 54, 55 different territories inside Africa, because of the lack of harmonization, you don't have the ability to go beyond one particular area. And it's a real challenge because people typically don't want to put manufacturing sites in areas with limited commercial activity. So it would be great if we could have a regional approach to it. The other piece around what's going to be critical is quality. You can't get around the fact that quality is important. Now, people have different perceptions of quality. Quality, it can be WHO level quality. Quality can be EU quality. It can be FDA quality. it can be strict regulatory authority quality, SRA. So we need to agree on what makes the most sense. And I think that as you start to deal with multinational organizations, and you can use Aspen's most recent vaccine platform with J&J, you know, they needed to step to a global level of quality, which required investment, which required a rethink perhaps of their supply chain, et cetera. So, and you have to be willing to participate in that global platform as well. So in other words, you can't just limit it to one area. I only want to make vaccines for this one country. That's just not how it works, because we need to be able to scale it across a very wide range of opportunities. The other piece that's critical is willingness to invest. These projects are not inexpensive. I think that Aspen's probably requested and received somewhere in the neighborhood of 250 million to up to about 700 million in terms of scaling up their business to accommodate for the vaccine opportunity. Well, think about that across Africa. Now, the other piece is, and this is the last piece, it takes a long time. I mean, this is not something you can do overnight. We did, when I was with Lilly a long time ago, we did a project with Aspen around multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. And that project took on 2 years or so to stand up and to get it quality certified, et cetera. So we have to have a longer horizon and a longer perspective that goes far beyond 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. We need to think about this as a permanent solution. And I think Naveen talked about it earlier. India is the pharmacy of the world. Well, you know, South Africa and Africa in general has the opportunity to do something similar. So that's on the how you qualify to get a voluntary license. It's a long-winded way of doing it. The other piece is, when we bring these companies online, do they have to do from API all the way through to fill finish? The short answer is no. The companies have the opportunity to pick up different aspects. Like, for instance, in the case of our voluntary license, we do supply API to some of the voluntary license holders where they take the product, the raw product, and then they'll do the fill finish and produce either nude vials, or they'll produce finished goods that are then packaged either in their location or at another location. So that is an opportunity. And I think that might be the way for us to take a look at how do we bring more companies online. We bring them in the fill finish side or even in the packaging side. And as they become more successful, as they grow their commercial enterprise, we start to expand the line, so much so that at some point we have the ability for them to produce API, which is another part of the process, and then use that API to finish the goods. So we have the flexibility to work up and down the chain. My wish and my prayer is that we have the opportunities to do this across Africa, and African countries and manufacturers work together. So you have one do API, the other one does fill finish, the other one works on packaging, et cetera. So that's one way to scale it. And can you imagine, we can do it like building an Airbus airplane. You know, Airbus is a consortium. It's not just the French, and they have multiple groups working. The Germans build the wings and somebody else. So there's an opportunity for us to do that as well in Africa. We just need to think broadly about how we do it. And I'm here to tell you that there's money available for us to scale this. There are so many different funds in the United States and other locations that they're looking for viable projects. They're looking for viable leadership on the continent that can do this. It's a matter of us actually pulling it together and doing it ourselves.
Thank you, Chris. I think this was really a very enlightening answer to my question. So just to summarize what you said, you know, obviously the volume and the existing facility should be amenable to some sort of expansion, and ideally it should be at least at regional scale, but with the vision for a broader market eventually. And this is the requirement. And obviously the quality is the fundamental issue behind any sort of deal. Now, I just want to share with you one thing, you know, it's that we in Africa, we have been going through also in the last 20 years and really driven by urgencies. we had the urgency of the HIV, and then we all got excited, and we thought that we are going to do this, we're going to do that. And then it calmed down somehow. And now we, under the pressure of the COVID-19, we are resurrecting ideas that. But I think that what you have submitted here is a sort of a long-term plan, which starts with voluntary licensing and back integrating based on the capacity of your potential partner in the countries, and producing also an idea for a regional integration across border, which is also what John Nkengasong has been asking for, the regional hub for vaccine manufacture for COVID or vaccine in general. I think it's a very important thing, this urgency versus a long-time vision, and the vision of back integrating and having a vision that is not at tomorrow morning, but is a vision at 5 to 10 years from now, and then build the pieces one by one. So thank you very much for that. And now, Dr. Naveen, can you answer my questions? Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher, for your great information and great ideas. How API is the best way to start, and then you must. I'm re-emphasizing, reintegrate the process from the beginning. I am sharing my own experience on hepatitis C diagnostics. Within our country, the diagnostic needed about 5 recombinant proteins, and they would come from 5 different continents. And the product is in the market, it's doing very well. And suddenly one company is bought over by another company, and then they decide internally that they cannot sell this recombinant protein to, let's say, this company in India. Now the product which was doing so well is suddenly gone. So I think to be independent, it is very, very vital that we should start with this, but with an idea that we are going to, so we begin with the end in the mind, that only those APIs, whose synthesis capability is available, they are not too challenging, and if the technology can be absorbed, so we can begin with that. Now, going back to, whether we want WHO or FDA qualified compounds or vaccines, and as you know that in India, affordability is the major thing. Everything has to be affordable, and if it is not affordable, it has zero efficacy. So with that idea, many of the manufacturing units in India are WHO approved because it is much more cost effective than the FDA approval. The product, the quality, in terms of, everything is ensured that it is identical, but in terms of the paperwork, the documentation, which becomes extra burden on the companies, which adds to the price. So many of these, vaccines and biogenerics which are produced in India, I am not sure, there may be only very, very few which are FDA approved. Most of them would be WHO qualified. In terms of biogenerics, if it is, for example, Hep B vaccine, we have 6 companies which make Hep B vaccines, and the production cost, and I'm told sometimes you sell this vaccine for 15 rupees or 10 rupees, which is, I don't know, in terms of dollar, it would be maybe 2 cents or 3 cents a vaccine. And the pentavalent vaccine, 5-in-1 vaccine or hexavalent vaccines are like $1 and 10 cents. And you can imagine that, the profit which these companies can make is almost so negligible, because a cup of coffee costs more than $1. And these 6 vaccines are being made in a GMP manufacturing. And for $1 and 10 cents. Of course, the volumes are large, but still the money which you get from, the electricity cost is going up, the salaries are going up. So when I speak to these companies, they are under a lot of pressure because they want to kind of increase the cost of the only thing which is going down is the cost of the vaccines. So for them to produce affordable vaccines for the whole world is also becoming very challenging because the infrastructure is getting much more expensive. So they try to introduce new products as quickly as possible. And the government of India allows these things, that if you have a product in another country, if you are able to show bioequivalence with very small, like 100 patients, if you can show it with 100 patients, so within 2 months, 3 months, you have a license to start and go manufacturing and get the profit from there. You asked about the botanicals. I truly believe that, I give you my example of dengue. India is the epicenter of dengue. We have at least maybe 30 to 50 millions of dengue infections in this country. And there is no drug available. So we went through the original Ayurveda and traditional knowledge, and of course dengue, chikungunya, all of these viruses are never mentioned in your traditional literature. So somehow you have to look at the symptoms of these and match the symptoms which WHO explains, and then shortlist the plants which were used for the similar kinds of system, like hemorrhagic fever and things like that. And then you must need a bioassay in your lab, which is an in vitro test tube assay or a tissue culture assay and an animal model system to kind of validate that what you're saying is right. You can even identify the compounds and get a patent on the use of that particular plant. For example, plant A for a particular disease, let's say dengue or chikungunya or Japanese encephalitis virus. So those patents are granted because this is not a prior knowledge. Plus, the companies in India, they go and isolate those compounds. What is necessary is that you have to isolate 4 compounds from the plant extract to get your patent verified. Now, it's not necessary that all these 4 compounds should have the activity. One of them should have the activity. So if you meet these criteria they call it a phytopharmaceutical drug, you get a patent, and it is up to you later on that if you can synthesize that particular drug in the lab, then you can get a patent on that. But then it is treated as a new chemical entity and the clinical trials become very expensive. But if it is a botanical drug, the clinical trials are very affordable. So that's where the companies, although they know what the molecule is, they know how to synthesize it, but since the clinical trial cost becomes very high because now it's a new chemical entity, they still use a botanical drug. It's treated as a new chemical entity, but it is still purified from the plants.
Thank you very much. I think that was really very useful insight on the biological products and also on natural products development for Africa, which is certainly something that we have to look at. Now, we might have, well, there is a question for Chris, in fact, and I'm sure you have already seen that, is about whether within your products you have only viral drugs, or do you also have an interest in vaccines and natural products? So maybe you want to share this with all the audience, Chris, as an answer.
Thanks, Giorgio. So we have no interest in vaccines. We're not a vaccine manufacturer. What we do want to do is take a look at partnering with vaccine manufacturers on, and Giorgio, you mentioned this earlier, we do run hepatitis B programs. And in West Africa, we're running a hepatitis B program that tries to intervene for pregnant moms through a technique that prevents or reduces the possibility of transmitting hepatitis B to the baby. And once that happens, there's a great opportunity then to partner with the company that makes hepatitis B vaccines to inoculate the baby. We have several products for hepatitis B on the treatment side, but we also have to be about trying to prevent the disease. So certainly on that side, we don't make the vaccines, but we partner with companies that actually have them. I don't think we do very much in the way of natural products. We're mostly an antiviral company. And then we're also getting into, and I see there, Carl Montague mentioned about CAR-T, great technology that only a few companies in the world have really perfected and developed it. I'll truly admit that it's a very expensive platform right now across all the companies that are dealing with it. But we're exploring that right now. I'm looking for partners because, as you know, there's a supply chain requirement, but there's also a testing and diagnostic requirement. So we are exploring right now the possibility of introducing that product here. Ours is called Yescarta, and it will be a great opportunity for us to partner with a few local companies to see if we can make that technology available here in South Africa.
Good. Now, that's very good. I don't see any further question coming from the floor, so that gives me another 5 minutes chance to discuss with you. And one thing, Chris, I wanted to ask you really is what we have seen now, and what also Naveen was telling us, is the opportunities of using patent protection for natural products and how that could work, out. And that is, it's really an interesting issue. So, you know, when we are debating patent protection and TRIPS agreement, and I can understand, you know, that the emergency situation like the current one with the COVID-19, just as it was the AIDS. But what I'm thinking more is about, does this TRIPS agreement and the whole issue about patent protection somehow is an accelerator for R&D in African countries or African companies that are coming in, both for natural products, but also for small molecule and any other products, including diagnostics and vaccines? Or is it something that, you know, will be like a boomerang? You know, you now saying, hey, I want a patent protection from this, but then you can be exposed to a compulsory licensing, or you can be exposed to other things. So what I'm saying is really, how do we really put an idea? How do you see this issue about patent protection in terms of encouraging R&D and patent protection as an obstacle to public health, as it were? So I really am interested to hear your and also Naveen ideas about this.
Thanks, Giorgio. First of all, the branded pharmaceutical industry and generic pharmaceutical industry, for that matter, is predicated on innovation. It's predicated on companies spending as much as 20% of their profits on innovation to try and innovate around diseases and ameliorate various diseases for patients around the world. The way that currently is financed and supported is through patents, because we have to recover the cost of that major investment. Most products, generally nowadays, there are $1 billion into development. Remember, the products that make it through, we have less than 10% success rate in some areas. So that all has to be financed and taken care of. Now, an area that I think we should really also think about that really opens the door is, clearly companies are focusing on the major markets, the top 12 to 15 markets around the world. We do recognize that Africa and low middle income countries have affordability challenges. And it's because of that we need to partner and work together. I don't think compulsory license is the way to go, because then companies fight. Then it becomes a legal issue, becomes a precedent around the world. I think what we need to do is sit around the table and figure out, okay, either it's a voluntary license opportunity, or maybe it's in the form of the WHO, there's a medicines patent pool. And maybe we put the products in the medicines patent pool and you can access it that way. But let's remember one thing. When you start to think about taking a license, either a compulsory license or otherwise, the product itself is only part of the entire treatment for a patient. And oftentimes, we're going to have companies that actually can produce a product for a country either through voluntary license or compulsory license. You know, when you talk about making vaccines, the making of the vaccine is probably 15% of getting that vaccine into somebody's arm. And we need to have a lot more of an involved conversation about how do we distribute it? How do we actually get the diagnostics right? How do we do all these other things? And so I think the IP debate is focused just on the pharmaceutical intervention, when it really needs to be focused on a much broader solution set for companies and for countries specifically.
Thank you, Chris. You want to add something, Naveen, on this debate?
Yeah, and also, you said that the patent protection for R&D, or is it a obstacle for public health? And I think if it is a vaccine or a drug, from my past experience, it is necessary to have the patent protection because it costs, as we know, billions of dollars to kind of have that exclusivity. But when it came to diagnostics, we have actually avoided doing the patents, and there, the information was kept with the company, and the company kind of kept the cost very, very down. To give you an example, the dengue diagnostic tests, used to come from other countries, like from US, from Australia, and from Korea, where the number of dengue cases are like very few, maybe 60 cases a year, or 600 cases a year, or maybe 60,000 cases a year. And we have, as I said, millions of cases here. The cost was very, very expensive to get that kits. When they started to produce these kits in India, the affordability now is like $1 for a diagnostic test. But there is no patent on this. Without patent, the cost is kept down, but the know-how is like this, that you can transfer the know-how to a second company or a third company. The strength of the company, the knowledge of the company, the ability of this company to absorb the technology and kind of polish it is also very important. So despite having the whole thing, not the entire thing, but the idea in the public domain, it's not very easy for people to produce the product of the same quality. On the other hand, this company, without having a patent, is the leader of this particular product. So I think both possibilities do exist, but I really want to re-emphasize the ignored area, which is the natural products, which I think are coming up, and I believe the competition is not that much, and the investment is not that much. And I think the affordability, and for countries like us, this will be a game changer. The only thing is that we have not put our mind, we have not provided experimental evidences for these things so that they can be globally accepted.
Thank you very much. I think it was really good. So I'm just trying to summarize a little bit around this issue. So certainly innovation is based or is driven by some sort of patent protection. I mean, I've been working also in industry for 20 years, and I know that very well. And industry spend a lot of money. There is a counter argument, though, there, Chris, is that especially in the US, a lot of money also comes from public, the NIH, and other sourcing that are supporting that research. So it's not only the industry. This is not to underestimate the costs related to the industry itself, because the industry is not just one lab or one factory. The industry is a much bigger and much more complex exercise. So I understand that. I also understand your point, and I think that that's where the big thing should be. Patent protection for innovation, and particularly for pathologies relative to the affluent society, is certainly very much needed to move the research and to develop products. Now, what happens is that when those products are also needed in the poorer countries, and this happened with the HIV crisis, when the US had a lot of patients, and then suddenly we had even more than them in Africa, and we had only very few drugs that were available for both the US, Europe, and Africa. And I think that's where the big issue comes in. And what you have said, I think, is very important. Currently, we have different ways of looking at it. There is a patent pool. There are companies that are visionary like yours that are open to voluntary licensing or transfer of technology, and having an idea about, or having also some feeling about creating the next pharma hub of the world out of India. Sorry, it's not because of India, but Naveen, but is also because Africa has that capacity, or should have that vision, as it were. So I agree on that. So we can say that certainly there are different ways of looking at issues relative to intellectual property and solutions for local manufacturing in Africa that are not confrontational, like compulsory licensing, which probably has to be avoided somehow, because then really doesn't make good for anyone. You know, it's only a big legal issue and and nothing else. And the other very important thing that you have highlighted is that this is not a 100-meter race. This is a marathon. Building capacity for pharmaceutical in a continent like Africa requires really a big vision, and requires very sound investment that are over time, so that we know that the real objective is 20 years from now, and how do we build it up to there? And of course, then comes the issue of political will, which is really... The other thing you mentioned, the patent pool, is also very interesting. As to diagnostic IP, etc., you know, I have been working with FIND for many years. We developed very important technologies like the Gene Expert. And you see, the point is that if we talk of lateral flow technologies, this is very easy to manufacture. And but when you are talking now with microfluidic and other stuff, you know, it really is the same thing that is with vaccine, or what Chris was saying about transferring technologies to company. You know, you require a very sophisticated technology or industrial capacity to look at replicating, even if these were not patented, which they are. In fact, there are patents covering microfluidics and certain parts of the microfluidic process. But the point is, you know, even if there wasn't a patent, it wouldn't be possible. So our first priority should be to build the capacity for African companies to look at manufacturing diagnostics and identifying proper technologies, develop capacity, and then being able to have a transfer of technology, to have licensing discussion with big companies, and slowly back integrating until they are capable of doing. I know India has been done a lot, where we know about the TrueNAT. They have been looking at molecular diagnostics in a very truly innovative way, and they're making progress. But you see, your level of industrial development is not yet comparable to Africa. Africa, we are not at that level. In the diagnostics, if at all, we are even weaker than we are in vaccine or in pharmaceutical products. So I just have 2 minutes for both of you to give your final comments, if you have anything you want to say and any points you want to make before we close it. We have only the last 5 minutes. Thank you very much. Chris.
Thanks a lot. First of all, thank you so much, Giorgio, and thank you, BioAfrica, for having the opportunity to create this platform. It's great to plug in and demonstrate our commitment and dedication to furthering Africa's pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry. Just a couple of things from me. One, I think we need to work on identifying possible manufacturing partners, whether it be in green space or existing. I think you'll find a lot of pharmaceutical companies and innovative companies interested in partnering with you on a scale that makes sense. We can work on the quality. I think that's critically important because that'll make more markets available. We also need to think about targeting specific diseases. Why can't we come up with a local manufacturing solution for rare diseases that are endemic to Africa? You know, we can't wait for the rest of the world to solve Africa's problems from this standpoint. And I think that we can come up with creative ways to do that. The clinical research needs to be executed here, and then also the manufacturing can also be done that way. And then finally, I said this once and I'll say it over and over again, there are many organizations that are looking to scale manufacturing capacity in Africa, from the US government all the way through, from NGOs to governments, et cetera. And there's a great opportunity for us to identify viable projects and work on getting that done. So anyway, it's been a real pleasure to engage at BioAfrica, and I look forward to chatting with you guys later.
Thank you very much, Chris. And Naveen, just 1 minute you have. Sorry to press you, but we are under a little bit of pressure with timing. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think once again, I also want to thank everyone for giving me this opportunity. And my last comment on this botanical is that that we must identify a particular disease, which is the biggest burden, for example, in a particular country, and then go back to our traditional knowledge and work with an academic lab to set up those assay systems. Unless you provide a biochemical evidence, the respect which this natural product deserve will never be there. We know that 80% of the global population still depends on natural products, and more than 100 chemical compounds which are in the market, they are all originated or inspired from botanical products. So we must kind of continue on that spirit.
Thank you very much, Naveen, and thank you, Chris. This was really, for me, a very exciting session. I was so excited to see you again, Chris, after such a long time. A great pleasure to meet you also, Naveen. I think the messages are clear. I hope the audience was satisfied with this session. I thank you very much, and I hope to see you both soon. Thank you. Bye.